Good evening. My name is Diana Ingram, and I am the Executive Director of Hill Center at the Old Naval Hospital. For those of you who don't know, the physical plant, the Old Naval Hospital, is a Civil War era hospital that was commissioned by Abraham Lincoln, and in fact, the very first naval hospital in Washington, D.C. We miss seeing everyone in person and in our beautiful historic building. But hooray for the big vax. We hope to welcome folks back in person in the not too distant future. So, welcome to the virtual edition of Talk of the Hill with Bill Press. Many thanks to Bill and his executive producer, Megan Rosenfeld, for pivoting with aplomb and grace and continuing to bring such wonderful programming to Hill Center audiences during these unprecedented times. Please be sure to check out all the wonderful things happening virtually and hopefully in person in the coming months at Hill Center. The best bet will be our weekly e-blast and on the website. So, award-winning journalist Bill Press returns this evening with Talk of the Hill, his provocative, ongoing strand of conversations with the most fascinating people of our time. Bill is indeed a multimedia superstar in his podcasts, on radio, as a book author of multiple books, and we are so blessed to have such a well-respected journalist as part of our core programming. Over the past 9 years at Hill Center, he's welcomed cabinet members, congressional representatives, senators, journalists, authors, nuns, and bishops, the Barefoot Contessa, and recently Dr. Sanjay Gupta. If you missed earlier Talk of the Hill conversations, you can check them out on our YouTube channel or on our Facebook page. And now, good evening, everyone. Let me turn this over to Bill. Over to you.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the Hill Center. Welcome to a very special program of Talk of the Hill with a very special guest tonight. My good friend, and of course, you all know him and love him as the anchor of CNN's Tonight with Don Lemon, the one and only Don Lemon, and author of a very passionate, very inspiring new book. This is The Fire: What I Tell My Friends About Racism. Hello, Don Lemon. Good to see you. Congratulations on the new book.
Oh, thank you, Bill. How are you?
We're doing great. Thank you. And, I've been honored to be a guest on your show several times. So I'm very excited tonight to have you as my guest. We could turn the tables a little bit, right?
I hope I can. I hope I do well and live up to your expectations.
No problem.
You're going to pay me back for all of the bad experiences you had on my show, right?
I love being there. So, Don, look at the title, right? And the way you start the book. This is the fire, and you start the book with a letter to your nephew. Certainly, clearly, a link to the great James Baldwin. It was such an inspiration in your life. What do you see as the connection between what Baldwin said in 1963 and what you are telling your friends in 2021?
I think the only real difference is that obviously there has been progress, right, when it comes to the number of people who are able to be professionals and who have a sense of owning their own lives. I mean, I think that goes without saying, meaning African Americans and people of color. But I think the big difference also is technology and information, right? But the through line is that we're still dealing with the same issues. We're still dealing with police brutality. We're still dealing with criminal justice, racism being built into the system. We're still dealing with systemic racism, even though there are forces out there in society now and in government who are saying that there is no systemic racism. We're still dealing with people being placed into certain areas and housing. And, as you know, Bill, people were set down into housing communities, projects. There just to stay, and they've remained there. So we're dealing with that in urban areas, and we're dealing with the really overt racism in rural, and especially in, I shouldn't say especially in southern areas, but in rural areas all over the country. So there's inequality, the same things, similar things that we're dealing with. And that's one of the reasons, obviously not one of the reasons, that's the reason I wrote the book. And one of the reasons I pen that letter to my nephew so that he won't have to live in a world like that. I'm hoping that he won't have to live in a world.
And James Baldwin said to his nephew, paraphrasing, right? Don't believe what the white people say about you.
Yeah,
Uh,
I never
that's
do.
that's what you're saying to your nephew too, right?
Well, I'm saying yes, I am saying to my nephew, don't believe what the white people say about you. But I'm also saying to my nephew that I'm here to tell you, because I think that my experience with James Baldwin, my experience may be a little bit different than James Baldwin. James Baldwin certainly had an enormous platform as a writer. He's a literary giant and genius. And he's a maverick and a trailblazer. He's all of those things. But I have a little bit of a different experience. I have a different platform than him, and my platform is more immediate than him.
Mhm.
So in a time where I'm living in a time now where we have made progress and strides, as I said in the previous answer before. So I'm telling my nephew that as an example, I am an example of what you can accomplish and beyond. What I want from him is that I want him to be able to embrace his beauty and his blackness and the full person that he is with an ease that I wasn't able to master at his age. Because had I been able to do that, I think I would be even further along and even more successful, and I would have been I would have achieved a sense of self-possession much earlier in life, and that would have not I wouldn't have had to deal with so many issues and so many internal problems.
Let's go back just about a month ago, April 20. I was with you on CNN watching when you were really the dominant voice as we heard the verdict for Derek Chauvin out in Minneapolis. Um, Guilty on all three counts.
Mhm.
How important was that call to our efforts to deal with systemic racism in this country?
It was historic. It was how important. Very simply, it was extremely important. I don't even know if I can quantify it as to the importance, um, because finally there was accountability. Finally, someone who was in a position of authority, who's supposed to protect and serve, was being held accountable in a way that the world was able to see, and where everyone was able to say, "Okay, finally, justice is served." So I don't even think that we know the enormity of it now. I don't think we even know the importance of it now. And I know, he still hasn't been sentenced as we're recording this now. Um, we don't know how long he's going to serve, what's going to happen with appeal and all those things. But for the
Mhm.
moment that we're in now, it's historic. It's big. It feels big because it is big. And I think it changes law enforcement going forward.
And I remember justice is served, the first three words, I believe, out of your mouth when justice the verdict was
You're a
announced.
smart man. And listen, immediately out of that, they came to me, and that's what I said. I said, finally, justice has been served.
Right.
And that was the quote that was picked up by every major news organization, every major newspaper around the country. I was glad that that happened because I thought it was important to hear a Black man say that. Because when I saw George Floyd laying on the street with the cop with his knee on his neck, I saw myself, I saw my uncles, I saw my father, and I saw my nephews. And I didn't want my nephews to grow up in a world like that. And that was the reason that I penned the letter to him, much as James Baldwin did, and wrote this book.
And then the big question, of course, is so where do we go from here or what happens now? So I want to read a little from your letter to your nephew where you talk about the murder of George Floyd.
Mhm.
I'm on just first page, page 3. Today I heard a dying man call out to his mama, and I wept for the world that will soon belong to you. I know what comes next as surely as I know the Mississippi rolls down to the sea. The weeping passes and the rage takes hold. The rage burns out and blame begins. The blame bounces back and forth, and promises are made. The promises wither, and complacency returns.
Mhm.
Do you still believe that?
I do. I do. And and if I can just read the next part and I'll tell you why. And I said, in the complacency stays, it stagnates like a lullaby on autoplay until another man dies face down on another street in another city and the weeping begins again. I still believe that. I do think that George Floyd and Derek Chauvin verdict was one part of the puzzle, one part of the equation. I think that we've got a lot more of those verdicts and a lot more of those court cases to go before we can finally say, okay, things are starting to change. This is one thing. And as surely as I said, as I was writing this, and I said the complacency, right, begins and the complacency returns, the amount of people who believe that George Floyd was killed when it first happened was drastically different than the amount of people who believed George Floyd was killed by the time the verdict came in. People had become complacent. They had become used to it. They had found a way to rationalize it, his death. They had found a way to blame him rather than the officer and the perpetrator. And so we have to make sure that that complacency doesn't return again. And when we start to see more police officers, more people in authority, not just police officers, but people who believe they're in authority, like what happened with Trayvon Martin, like what happened with Ahmaud Arbery down in Brunswick, Georgia. More people with authority and police officers held accountable for their actions. Then I will go back and say, when I wrote that book, the complacency was returning. Now I'm going to write another book because we are finally changing it and the complacency is not returning.
You mentioned Trayvon Martin and Ahmaud Arbery. When you look at just the names that pop up, right, of young Black men killed by police officers, those two were not, but killed by, as you say, people in authority. One was so-called vigilante. But we think of Michael Clark and Tamir Rice and Eric Gardner, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Andrew Brown, Jonathan Price, who you talk about, all killed at the hands of white police officers. What's behind that? You talk a little bit in your book about this police violence. It stems from kind of the history of policing, or what's behind it?
Well, I mean, as you know, Bill, the history of policing, there's two things here. The history of policing is slave catching. Right?
Yeah,
That was
right.
that was the beginning of policing in this country, to catch the slaves and to hold them, to make sure that um, that the system remained in place and there was free labor, and that free labor remained, so that people can make money off of it. Capitalism. That's what it was about. It is also about why you see this happening now, is because certain people in the society feel that they have an authority over you, and when they have a gun and a badge, that authority is magnified. Their feeling of that authority is magnified, and it should be, because they hold your life and death in your hands. But it is because I believe is that many police officers have become jaded, and they don't see the people they're supposed to protect and serve as humans. They see them as criminals. They see them as problematic people. And usually, anytime you have an interaction with a police officer, it's problematic. You call the police officer, you call a police officer, or a police officer is called to where you are because there's an issue, because there's
Mhm.
trouble, because something bad is going on. So most people don't sing hallelujah when they see a police officer, because usually you're involved in something that is at the worst time of your life. So I think police officers, um, and they do have a tough job, I will acknowledge that, but they don't see people as human, especially African Americans. And I think they don't see their humanity. And I think that's the biggest issue in policing. And it's also the history of policing as well.
Right. In dealing with this issue, how important also were the right after in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, the Black Lives Matter movement and the protests,
Mhm.
as you point out in the book, many millions of white people joined these protests all over the country. It really did change the dynamic, didn't it? I mean, I know a lot of people criticize that this is just, they're burning down the cities, they're looting the whole thing, but that was not the full story, for sure, not even part of this
No, but I mean, we have to distinguish between protesters and rioters. And
Yeah.
listen, it is unfortunate, but there are always going to be people who take advantage of situations, right? People who mingle in with the legitimate protesters, and people who are just out for themselves, and people who are bad actors. And that should not be tolerated. And those
Right.
people should face the consequences as well. But yes, and if you, going before I answer your question about about the white folks who are out there, look at the number of people when we're talking about complacency. The number of people who supported Black Lives Matter during during the height of that, when George Floyd first died, and then now the support has dwindled. Saying
Right.
people become complacent, they try to rationalize things. But yeah, I think having white people out there as allies really made a huge difference, because it showed the world, especially older people who may be steeped in tradition and in old ways of thinking about, well, why are they out there doing this? Why are they rabble rousing? Why are they shaking the apple cart? Shouldn't they just comply? The situation isn't that bad. It showed them, those young folks out there, most of them young, white folks, showed their parents or their grandparents that, hey, this isn't right. And we're standing up for our fellow citizens, this time who happen to be Black. But I believe those same kids, those same young folks of all ethnicities would be out there for other people who are facing inequities. And I think it's time that people got out and do some protesting about our Asian brothers and sisters who are facing anti-Asian hate. So yeah, I believe it did make a huge difference. It does make a huge difference having allies. And I think we need to listen to those young people. They're trying to pull us not necessarily into the future, but into the now, because they're tired of dealing with discrimination, and they're tired of their fellow citizens being treated unequally in society.
Right. Um, in terms of
But
racism,
how could you not? Who could not, especially if you're a young person? I know it was tough. We're in the middle of a pandemic, but young people feel like they're, immortal, right?
of course.
we now, I think about my mortality every day as I talk to my mom and she'll say, oh, such and such passed, and I drove by Miss whatever's house and it's not there anymore. I didn't know she died. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm getting so old. But if we were all sitting in our homes, Bill, vulnerable because we're in the middle of a pandemic, we were on lockdown and quarantine, and we had nowhere to go, but all we could do was watch this man die with a knee on his neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. That we were all so vulnerable because we didn't know where we were going, if we were going to be sick, if our loved ones were going to die, if they were going to catch COVID, all of those things. So it made us open. It was a great equalizer. It made us open and vulnerable and empathetic. And so the young folks felt that, and they got out there and they went on the streets and they fought. The older people at home did what they could do, and they were basically outraged by it. So I think, yes, the young people helped, but it also, the timing and what was going on in the country also helped to draw attention to the suffering and to the inequality.
Is the first step toward dealing for all of us with systemic racism to acknowledge that systemic racism does exist, that we are basically still a racist society?
Of course, it is a simple answer. But the real thing that is, in order to deal with it, is that we're going to have to deal with the history of the country. It's going to have to be taught in schools and in elementary school, and not just in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and how Columbus discovered America. We're going to have to talk about the people of color who came over before the Mayflower, Bill.
Mm-hmm.
The people who we're going to have to show as much respect and reverence for people who came over on slave ships who helped to build a country for free, as we do for the people who came over on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, or the Mayflower. And until we teach that part of our history and other parts of our history, other parts of history that have to deal with people of color, and especially Black people from African nations, then we're going to continue to have people who deny systemic racism. We're going to continue to have insurrections on our capital. We're going to continue to have people who can be co-opted by a person or people who lie about elections being stolen by people who live in large urban areas, meaning Black and brown people. So that's how I think we're going to deal with it.
So the 1619 Project,
yeah,
is right on.
I think the 1619 Project is right on. I think that there's not one or the other. You can talk about 1776. You can talk about the founding of this country if you want to put it in those terms. I don't think of it as founding. Or if you want, the drawing up of the documents to colonize the country. Okay, fine, we can talk about that. But I think they're all legitimate, and I think there are things to learn even beyond the 1619 project. And there are things that I learned about history in researching this book that I didn't know about, that I write about the German Coast Uprising in Louisiana. Things that you don't hear about the struggle and the history of Black people, the history that is used to elevate white people and to denigrate or diminish Black people.
And of course, there are some people who hear that and think that's sort of undermining America, right? Undermining the greatness of America and the
No, I
revolution.
think that's what makes America great. That is what really makes America great, is being able to own all of that. And in spite of all that, we're still the greatest nation on earth, the greatest democracy. And until we realize that there were many, many different people who contributed to the beginning and to the founding and to the promise of this country to build a more perfect union. And until we realize that, then we won't reach our greatness and our potential.
Yeah. So what do you say, what can anybody say to a guy like Lindsey Graham, who said on Fox News a week or so ago, I was looking forward to our interview when I saw Lindsey Graham say, there's no systemic racism in this country. After all, we elected Barack Obama and Kamala Harris.
Yeah. What do I say to him? I should say to him to stop pandering to his constituents that he wants to vote for him. Stop exploiting the fear of those people, because he knows that's where that fear comes from, that they are no longer going to have the preeminent voice, and that Black and brown and other marginalized people are taking over the country. And in some way, the country's going to change fundamentally because of it. Lindsey Graham knows that. So he is, what he's doing is pandering to a certain group of people. And he's exploiting, quite frankly, their fear and their ignorance. And he should be ashamed of himself because he knows better. What he should be doing as a leader is trying to educate people and trying to get them to understand that if you develop relationships, if you take care of each other as countrymen, then you have no need to fear Black people or brown people or Asian people or any other person who is other than white in this country. That's what he should be saying.
How badly did Donald Trump set back the movement or the progress that we had made?
Well, I think Donald Trump, he set back people's thinking in the moment. And I think that I think the future is going to show us how much he's done so. I think that what Donald Trump did, and I'm sure most people ask me about about in the book where I said he's a president that we deserved and probably the one that we needed.
Right. Right.
Because he exposed the racism that was lying just beneath the surface for white people. For Black people, the racism was already there. We knew we didn't live in a post-racial society. So I think what he did was he legitimized the hatred and the racism and the bigotry from people who were susceptible to that. And for others who fight against those kinds of things and who know better, then what he did was he caused us to dig in deeper to fight for a better way and to fight for equity and equality for everyone. So, yeah, he divided the country, but what he did was, I think he showed us who we are. And if you're a person who cares about other people and who care about all people, and that all people deserve the same rights in this society, then that cemented that part of you. And if you didn't, if you were looking for an excuse and you were saying, my God, they're taking over and they're changing our country, then he legitimized that for you. So the future will tell us what that division actually means.
So to that extent, I was struck too when you write that this is the president that we needed at that time for the reasons you just pointed out, right? Not because such a great policy genius or something, but no. Right.
Listen, and with that, maybe I should have written, and I think I did write something to that extent, but I could have been clearer and said that I and most people would have preferred a different experience, right?
Hmm.
But because we place such a premium on celebrity, that's what got us there. Because we place such a premium on having our beliefs reinforced, that's how we got Donald Trump. Because we place such a premium on money and wealth, that's how we got Donald Trump. And perhaps our priorities need to change. So when I say the president we deserved and probably the one we needed, that's what I mean by that.
So we hear so much about white supremacists. We see the evidence of the white supremacists on January 6th and now in Charlottesville and many other places. Is there, did you find or do you see that there's more white supremacy today, or that it's just more public?
He became the imprimatur for white supremacists, right?
Yeah.
So here's the thing. As I think some people were watching that day and they were clutching their pearls on January 6th saying, oh my gosh, I can't believe it was happening. For many of us who were, especially the journalists of color who are out there and our allies, our white allies, who are saying, this is all racism. This is racism pure and simple. This whole Trump movement is racism. You may say that that all Trump supporters aren't racist. Well, if you aren't, then you certainly overlooked it. You didn't place a priority on racism. You prioritized other things besides that. And so the insurrection was just a culmination and proof of that. It was like 1 + 1 = 2, and the 1 + 1, the number 2, was the insurrection. And so when people saw all of those people on the Capitol calling police officers the N-word, saying that this country is made for us and that it was stolen, beating police officers with Blue Lives Matter flags and the American flag, then you realize that everything that they stood for, they said they stood for, was bunk. They didn't support law enforcement. They didn't respect the flag because they were using it for violence. And they certainly didn't respect the black police officers who they were calling the N-word. And how many people of color did you see out there? Very, very few, if any, who actually entered the Capitol. So I think that, black people were sitting at home, and I know I was like, see, there you go. I mean, it was bound to happen because you didn't believe us when we said it's racist. You denied it. You said, I'm not racist. I'm sick of your race baiter. I'm sick of you calling me racist. Well, there's the proof in living color.
How's Joe Biden doing in changing the tone and maybe getting back to the real issues and dealing with them?
I think he's doing a great job at it, quite honestly. I think it may not be, he's not razzle dazzle. We've had razzle dazzle, and okay, razzle go dazzle, be dazzled, goodbye. We need change. We need to see we need receipts. And so far we're seeing the receipts, even against all the hesitation that is out there, against all the resistance that's out there, against all the Mitch McConnells who are saying their number one agenda is to make sure that Biden's agenda doesn't get passed. People are getting vaccinated. They are a lot more in the beginning. Now there's a lot of hesitancy. And of course, Trump supporters aren't going to do it because they think it's a slap in the face, right? Or it's not real. But it is happening to the extent, and probably to a better extent than people thought about. The economy is turning around. We had one bad jobs report, but let's see what happens with the next one. He is getting help to Americans, regardless of how you feel about it. He is ignoring the noise, quite frankly, on cable news every night, and from the Republicans in Congress and the Senate who don't want to work for him. And guess what? He's like blinders on. He just keeps policy and he keeps doing his work, and that is admirable. And he's not doing it by being on Twitter every day, by being on television every day, by saying how great he is, that he knows better than the generals. He is a gentleman and a professional, and it is so refreshing to see that in the Oval Office. Competency.
You end the book, Don, with, after describing all the things we've talked about and with great detail and again, great passion.
Can I say something before you
Yeah.
ask
Yes, please.
that question? But I do have to say I hope he doesn't appear to be spending that much time. His definition of bipartisanship appears to be at this moment bipartisanship in the country, meaning not in Washington, D.C., not the people there. I hope he doesn't spend too much time trying to get Republicans to like him and work with him, because he should have learned. Hopefully he learned from the Obama administration that I don't believe it's ever going to happen. It would be great if it did. I don't think it will. Sorry to interrupt you.
No. I second your point. And I think Joe Biden is willing to at least try for bipartisanship.
Right.
But if they don't come along, then damn it, we'll do it without you, right?
Yeah,
So
I agree.
full speed ahead, which I like that too. I started to say, you end with a real message of hope, right? And again, if I can, just I'm going back to page 195 here. I know you got your copy there too.
Yeah.
Where you express that so strongly. We are capable of releasing the burden of racism. We're capable of dialogue that fosters intersectional alliances. We're capable of educating future generations with self-honesty and shared humanity. We are capable of intelligent, organized activism that pushes toward a common goal. So you really I think you use the word, we all have to become agents of change, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you're confident that we can. What is that hope based on, given our 250 years history of the opposite?
Bill, I answer it in the next thing. I said we can be simultaneously fearless about our future and truthful about our past. So what that means is that we have to establish relationships with each other. It means that Don Lemon, a black man from the South, and Bill Press, a white man from, where are you from, Bill?
Hey, from Delaware.
From Delaware can have conversations like this. Once we're both fully vaccinated, and I hope you are, I am, that we can actually go sit and have a beer or a coffee and talk about these issues and earnestly, honestly talk about these issues and hold each other to account, but also give each other some grace in the conversation. So I think that that it's not just one person against the other, right? That how we're going to do this is if we see each other's humanity. And in order to see each other's humanity, you must have a relationship with people. And I think that's the only way. And you must see other people's humanity, and you must care about other people. If you don't care about them, then it's easy to put your knee on their neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. That's how I believe. That's why I'm optimistic.
Right. And you end with a note of optimism, which, and James Baldwin does too. So again, you come together there at the end of the book. Don, you've been very generous with your time. I know we've got a show tonight. I don't want to take too much more, but we have a few questions that have come in from knowing we were recording this from our regular audience at the Hill Center. If you might entertain a couple of questions.
For sure.
First is, so what was your nephew's reaction when he read your letter?
Quite honestly, he's like, "Oh, that's cool, Uncle Don." He's 13, and here's the thing: he was 13 years old when it happened, and usually they come up for the summer and spend a couple weeks with me, and I wasn't able to physically have him up last summer. And so rather than, I don't, run, I don't I do hug him, and I say, I love you, but I don't call him up and say, hey, I love you, whatever. Because then he'd be like, Uncle Don, that's weird. I got to go play my video game. So I got to go back to Fortnite. So I think that he's a 13-year-old boy, and his reaction is like, oh, that's kind of cool that I'm in a book. But I think he really won't understand it until he matures and becomes a bit older.
Right. Another question about an effort that has gotten a lot of attention from African-American CEOs like Kenneth Chenault and Kenneth Fraser, who have really organized other CEOs to oppose what's going on in state after state with efforts to suppress the vote. Mm-hmm. Your take on that?
That was another reason I didn't mention that I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because we live in a capitalist society. And the moment you start to affect people's pocketbooks is when you get their attention. And so I think people like Ken Chenault and other CEOs, and just other CEOs, not necessarily of color, but just around the country, who realize that they must represent not only their employees and their company and their stockholders, but for the people who buy their products or who view their products, or who are buying other products because of their products, like at sports, if you know what I mean. So I'm optimistic that there are enough people who are of right mind out here, and I don't mean right politically, but who
Mhm.
want this country to move forward and not backwards to a time when people didn't have equity and equality, that they will be able to, quite honestly, affect companies' pocketbooks where they do the right thing, and organizations where they do the right thing. That's how you get people's attention. And I write about that in the book as well, when I talk about movies and monuments, and that it was all. It's in the chapter all about the Benjamins.
Right. So
Yeah.
that effort on the part of, it's Georgia, it's Texas, it's Florida, it's Arizona. Um, Again, that's more of a manifestation of a racist society where they believe they see people of color as denying them electability, I guess. Right?
Yeah, denying them not only electability, but denying them again. Racism and discrimination is about denying rights. It was Jim Crow. It was denying rights. So now you're denying people the right to vote, or the ease to vote, or even in many instances, the facilities to vote, the agency to vote. So if there is not a drop box near where you are, you don't have an ease, you don't have a facility to vote. If you are closing polling places in certain areas, again, same thing. If you're limiting hours and restricting hours, same thing. If you're not wanting people to vote on Sunday, or take souls to the polls, or give people food or water in line, all of those things is a denial, in a way, of the ease and the right to be able to cast your ballot.
Your book was reviewed in the Washington Post. Again, I should do this more often. See, I need to learn a lot from you, Don. That our guest is Don Lemon. His book is "This Is the Fire: What I Say to My Friends About Racism." The review in the Washington Post, a little bit snarky, I thought, when Trey Johnson says, "quote Lemon goes to great pains to make the case for Black justice, racial progress, and a re-examination of where we've been and are going. But I couldn't help thinking that if it takes almost 200 pages to convince my friends of this, I need new friends."
Well, if we listen, I think that is a very simplistic view, a simplistic way to think about it. I didn't see that review. I should. I believe it or not, I don't read my own press, but I think,
Good man, smart man.
yeah, I don't believe that, and I do think that also with reviewers, everyone has their motivations, and so you should be able to you understand what I'm saying about that.
Right.
So I hadn't heard. I actually didn't read that one, but let me just say this: I am not trying to convince anyone of anything, so that the whole premise is wrong. What I'm trying to do is get you to understand my point of view, and I'm trying to get you to have conversations that you may not have anywhere else. And so, I'm not trying to convince my friends of anything, but if you can get people to understand something who may not understand it, if you can move people along the spectrum who may be, if you can move people a little bit further along the spectrum in the right direction, then I don't see anything wrong with trying to move them along and trying to convince them. And so I have friends who have been more open to the possibility and understanding what it's like to be and live in Black skin after what happened to George Floyd than ever before. More than ever before, they're more interested in it. So if it takes 200 pages to try to convince them and to bring them to the right side, I'm completely okay with that, even if it takes 1,000 pages.
And this question from one of our listeners: is there anything we can do to get police to quit stopping our Black males like my son because they, quote, fit the description?
Is there anything that we can do?
Right.
I think that we're gonna have to have some policing reform. We're gonna have to start hiring police officers who represent the community, who live in the community, who understand the community. We are going to have to, I don't believe, as I write in the book, in the slogan, defund the police, because I think it is it only gives your detractors ammunition to, and it doesn't help win over any allies. But that doesn't believe that I don't believe in what defund the police and many of the things that they stand for. Many of the things that they are proposing.
Mhm.
And so I think that we're going to have to take a good hard look at policing, and that may be purging of a lot of police departments and changing the structure of those departments and how we use policing and what the actual roles of police are in our society.
I recall in the book you talked about the 3 Ps, right? Policy and prosecution was the last one. I know that. There was
Yeah.
one in between, right? Which is all part of police reform, right?
Yeah.
And finally, an off the wall question, then we'll let you go. So, what's it like? Here's a question that came. What's it like doing a nightly TV show without Donald Trump?
It is. It's actually more interesting. I'm actually more excited about my job. I'm happier going to work. I'm more connected, and I'm more passionate about what I do than when he was in office. Because each night, as you know, when you came on the show for the last 4 years, it was going to be something that was Trump related.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily so now. Now I get to talk about policy. Now I get to talk about what's working and what's not working when it comes to the stimulus packages for our fellow citizens. What's working and not working when it comes to how we're trying to get people vaccinated in the country. What's working and not working when it comes to healthcare. How we're going to deal with childcare and infrastructure, rather than having an infrastructure week every month or every other month, where we only got a photo op of it and the president getting in an 18-wheeler and doing this and pretending he's honking a horn. We're actually talking about do we see infrastructure as traditionally as roads and bridges, or do we see it in terms of Wi-Fi for everyone, especially for rural communities, and how we get oil and gas and electricity on the grid to people, so that they don't have to deal with what Texas had to deal with just a couple of months back in winter. We're actually talking about how to move America forward, rather than the toxicity of the Trump administration every day and the division. It's great.
Refreshing.
I love going to work.
Right. Refreshing change. A
It
lot less BS to deal with. Right?
Yeah, we actually have to think about, like, hey, what are we going to do today? Wow, there's so much to talk about that actually is really important to people and their lives, and that makes a difference in people's lives, instead of palace intrigue.
Amen. Again, Don Lemon, the book. This is the fire. What I say to my friends about racism. Don, I learned a lot from it. I was inspired by it, motivated by it. Thank you for writing it. And thank you for being with us at the Hill Center tonight.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I'd love to come back, and I hope to see you on my show as well.
All right. We'll do that, and have a good show tonight. See you later.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thanks, Don.